I never thought my son's wedding day would be the moment that broke me completely. At 55 years old, I had weathered many storms in my life: the death of my parents, a difficult divorce, financial hardships that nearly crushed me, but nothing prepared me for the public rejection from my only son on what should have been one of the happiest days of our family. My name is Michael, and I had always believed I was a good father. Not perfect. I've never claimed perfection, but I was present. I worked 2 jobs for years to provide for my son after his mother left when he was just 7. I attended every school event I could, coached his little league team, and stayed up countless nights helping with homework. I sacrificed dating, personal hobbies, even career advancements to be there for him. I thought he knew that. I thought it mattered. The morning of Andrew's wedding was surreal. I remember standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie, practicing my smile. I'd written a heartfelt speech that I'd rewritten at least 20 times. I wanted to express how proud I was of the man he'd become, how honored I felt to be his father. The irony of those words now makes my chest ache. When I arrived at the venue, everything seemed perfect. The gardens were immaculate, flowers arranged precisely, white chairs lined up in neat rows. Andrew's soon-to-be wife, Jessica, came from a wealthy family, and it showed in every detail of their wedding. My simple contribution, paying for the rehearsal dinner with money I'd been saving for years, felt painfully inadequate compared to her parents' grand gestures. "Hey, Dad," Andrew said when I found him in the groom's room. His smile seemed genuine, and he gave me a quick hug. "Thanks for coming early." "Wouldn't miss it for the world, son," I replied, feeling a surge of fatherly pride. He looked so handsome in his tuxedo, so grown up. "Need help with anything?" "No, Uncle Robert's handling everything," he said, glancing toward his uncle, my ex-wife's brother, who was helping the groomsmen with their boutonnieres. "He's got it all under control." Robert had always been a sore spot in our relationship. After the divorce, he had become increasingly present in Andrew's life. Robert was everything I wasn't: wealthy, connected, smooth-talking. He could offer Andrew entree into social circles I couldn't even approach. Weekend trips to ski resorts, connections for internships at prestigious firms, a luxury car for his 16th birthday. Things I could never provide, no matter how many extra shifts I took. "Of course," I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. I retreated to a corner of the room, watching as Robert laughed with my son, slapped his back, and told him how proud he was. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I walked to my seat in the front row alone, nodding politely to Jessica's family members who barely acknowledged me. I wasn't part of their world, and they made no effort to hide that fact. As Andrew stood at the altar waiting for his bride, I could see the man he had become: confident, poised, successful. He had my eyes, my smile, but everything else about him reflected the world Robert had introduced him to. When Jessica appeared at the end of the aisle, the entire gathering rose. She was stunning in her designer gown, her father proudly walking beside her. I glanced at Andrew's face and saw tears in his eyes. My own vision blurred as I remembered holding him as a baby, teaching him to ride a bike, bandaging scraped knees. Where had that little boy gone? When had the distance between us grown so vast? After the ceremony came the reception, and that's when everything fell apart. I was seated at what was technically the family table, but at the far end, almost as an afterthought. Robert, however, sat near Andrew, leaning in close for conversations, laughing loudly at inside jokes I wasn't privy to. The DJ announced it was time for toasts. Jessica's father went first, eloquent and charming, speaking of love and family in ways that made everyone nod appreciatively. Then it was my turn. I approached the microphone, hands trembling slightly as I unfolded my carefully prepared speech. "Andrew," I began, my voice cracking slightly, "from the moment you were born, you have been my greatest joy, my proudest achievement." I spoke of his childhood, his determination, his kind heart. I mentioned the nights I'd spent helping him with science projects, the Saturday mornings at his soccer games. As I talked, I noticed his smile seemed forced, his eyes darting occasionally to Robert, as if seeking his approval. I finished my toast, raising my glass with hands that shook more than I wanted to admit. The applause was polite but tepid. Then Robert stood up. Though he wasn't on the official list of speakers, he took the microphone with the ease of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "I know I'm not on the program," he said with a charming laugh that instantly won over the crowd, "but I couldn't let this moment pass without saying a few words about this incredible young man." The room quieted, everyone leaning in to listen. Robert spoke eloquently about Andrew's accomplishments, but subtly took credit for guiding him through college choices, introducing him to Jessica at one of his famous summer parties, mentoring him in his career. With each word, I felt myself becoming smaller, more invisible. "I've had the privilege of watching you grow into an exceptional man," Robert continued, his voice thick with emotion that seemed genuine. "And I want you to know how proud I am of you." What happened next plays in my mind on repeat, like a horror movie I can't shut off. Andrew stood up, microphone still on, and embraced his uncle tightly. Then, clearly enough for everyone to hear, he said the words that shattered what was left of my heart. "You're the father I never had." The table went completely silent. Jessica's mother gasped softly. Her father looked down at his plate. The microphone captured it all, broadcasting my humiliation to every corner of the reception hall. People froze with champagne glasses halfway to their lips, eyes darting uncomfortably between Andrew and me. In that moment, it was as if the past 28 years of sacrifices, of love, of simply trying my best, had been erased. All those nights I'd worked double shifts to pay for his braces, his school trips, his first car, the promotions I'd turned down because they would have required moving away from his school. The lonely evenings I'd spent in our small apartment while he was at Robert's lavish home for holidays, being showered with expensive gifts I could never match. I sat there, unable to move, unable to breathe. Andrew seemed to realize what he'd said after a moment, his eyes finally finding mine across the table. There was something there. Shock, perhaps regret. But he didn't take it back. He didn't reach for me. He didn't try to explain. Robert, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. He clapped Andrew on the back and quickly tried to move things along, calling for the DJ to start the music again. But it was too late. Some wounds cut too deep to be covered by well-meaning distractions. With as much dignity as I could muster, I slowly stood up. I didn't make a scene. I didn't shout or cry. I simply placed my napkin on the table, nodded once to no one in particular, and walked away from the table. No one called after me, no one followed. I moved through the crowd of strangers in expensive clothes, past the elaborate flower arrangements that cost more than my monthly salary, past the ice sculpture and champagne fountain. As I reached the exit, I paused for just a moment and looked back. The party had resumed. Music played, people danced. My son stood in a circle of his new family, his wife, her parents, and Robert, laughing at something someone had said. My absence hadn't even created a ripple in the celebration. My seat at the table would remain empty, but the wedding would go on perfectly fine without me. I stepped into the cool evening air, loosened my tie, and felt the first tears slide down my cheeks. I had given everything I had to being a father, and somehow it hadn't been enough. Not once in those 28 years had I ever made my son feel like he didn't have a father. Yet here I was, standing alone outside his wedding reception, branded publicly as insufficient, invisible, non-existent in his narrative of who raised him. I drove home in silence, no radio, no phone calls, just the sound of my own breathing as I tried to process what had happened. When I got to my modest apartment, I sat in the dark living room for hours, surrounded by framed photos of Andrew growing up, School pictures, sports team photos, his high school graduation, evidence of a life we had shared, or so I had thought. That night marked the beginning of my absence. I didn't call Andrew the next day. I didn't text to congratulate him again or wish him well on his honeymoon. For the first time in his life, I stepped back completely. Not out of spite or to teach him a lesson, but because the pain was too raw, too all-consuming. I needed to protect what was left of myself. A week passed, then 2. No call from him either. No acknowledgement of what had happened, no apology, not even a generic thank you note for my presence or my gift. It was as if I had been completely written out of the story of his life, a minor character no longer needed for the plot to advance. It was during this silence that I began to reflect on our relationship over the years. Had I been blind to the truth? Had Andrew always felt this way? I searched my memories for signs I might have missed, moments where I had failed him so completely that he could say those devastating words with such conviction. There had been challenges, of course. After the divorce, money was always tight. I couldn't provide the lifestyle his mother and Robert could. When he'd return from weekends with them, he'd be wearing new designer clothes, talking about the fancy restaurants they'd visited, the country club where Robert had taught him to play golf. I'd listen with forced enthusiasm, then help him with his homework at our scratched kitchen table in our apartment where the heating was unreliable and the neighbors argued loudly through thin walls. As he grew older, the divide became more pronounced. Robert got him into an elite private high school with a phone call to the headmaster, a former college roommate. I worked overtime to help with what little tuition I could contribute. Andrew began spending more holidays with them, more weekends. I told myself it was good for him to have those opportunities, those connections. I ignored the way he'd sometimes look around our apartment with poorly concealed disappointment when he returned. But despite all that, I had been there. Every single day I had been there. When he had pneumonia at 12 and needed someone to sit up with him all night, it was me holding the cool cloth to his forehead. When he crashed his first car, the used Honda I had saved for months to buy him, not the BMW Robert had offered. It was me who picked him up from the police station at 3 a.m., not saying a word of reproach on the drive home. When he struggled with calculus his junior year, terrified of losing his chance at a good college, it was me sitting with him night after night, learning the material alongside him so I could help. How had none of that mattered? How had all of it been so thoroughly erased? 3 weeks after the wedding, my phone finally rang with Andrew's number. I stared at it, heart pounding, unsure if I was ready for whatever conversation would follow. On the 5th ring, I answered, "Dad?" His voice sounded uncertain, younger somehow. "Hello, Andrew," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, though my hand was shaking. We're back from the honeymoon. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee or something." I closed my eyes, breathed deeply. "Why?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What do you mean, why?" "Because we need to talk." "About what happened at the wedding?" I asked directly. A pause. "Yes, among other things. I agreed to meet him at a small cafe halfway between our homes the following day. That night, I barely slept, rehearsing what I wanted to say, what I needed him to understand. Not just about the wedding, but about the years of feeling like I was competing with Robert, always coming up short, always being the practical parent rather than the fun one, the one who could make dreams come true with a checkbook and connections. The cafe was busy when I arrived, filled with the morning rush of people grabbing coffee before work. Andrew was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking immaculate in what I assumed was his work attire. An expensive suit, designer watch, polished shoes. The corporate law firm where he worked, where Robert had arranged his first internship, clearly paid well. "Dad!" He stood as I approached, an uncertain smile on his face. "Thanks for coming." I nodded, sitting across from him. A cup of coffee was waiting for me, black, the way I've always taken it. At least he remembered that much. "How was the honeymoon?" I asked, more to fill the awkward silence than out of genuine interest. Bora Bora was amazing. Jessica's parents arranged everything. Of course they did. But that's not... I wanted to talk about what happened at the reception. I took a sip of my coffee, waiting. Andrew ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he was nervous. "What I said to Uncle Robert, I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Didn't you?" I set down my cup carefully. "Because it sounded pretty clear to me, Andrew, the father I never had. Those were your exact words." He flinched. "I was emotional. It was a big day. Robert has been a big influence in my life. You know that." "Oh, I know. Better than anyone." I tried to keep the bitterness from my voice and failed. "What I don't understand is how you could say that with me sitting right there, after everything. After all the years I gave you everything I had." Andrew shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, you don't understand. My life with you was... it was hard." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Hard? You think I don't know it was hard? I was there, Andrew. I lived it too. I worked 80-hour weeks so you wouldn't have to feel how hard it really was. That's just it." He leaned forward, eyes suddenly intense. "You were always working, always tired, always stressed about money. Our apartment was small. We never went anywhere exciting for vacations. When my friends talked about ski trips or summer homes, I had nothing to contribute." I stared at him, truly seeing for the first time how different our perceptions of those years were. "So that's what makes a father? Money, vacations, status?" He had the grace to look ashamed but pressed on. "It wasn't just that. With Robert, things were easier. He had time to talk, to really listen. He never seemed burdened by my presence." The unfairness of it took my breath away. I was a single father working multiple jobs to keep a roof over our heads, to save for your college fund. Of course I was tired, of course I was stressed. But burdened? Never. Not once did I ever regret being your father, even on the hardest days. Andrew looked down at his untouched cappuccino. "I know you sacrificed a lot. I do. But growing up, I felt like I was just another responsibility to you. Another thing on your to-do list. With Robert, I felt special." The cafe continued to buzz around us, people going about their normal lives, unaware of the painful dismantling of a relationship happening in their midst. I took a moment to gather myself, to push past the hurt, to find words that might reach him. "Do you remember when you were 14 and got cut from the baseball team?" I asked finally. He looked up, surprised by the change in direction. "Yeah, Coach Peterson was a jerk. You were devastated, cried for hours, said you'd never be good enough at anything." I traced the rim of my coffee cup. "Robert was supposed to take you that weekend, some sailing trip he'd been talking about for months." Andrew's expression changed slightly, a flicker of recognition. "He cancelled, had some work emergency." "Yes, and instead of the sailing trip, you and I spent the entire weekend at the batting cages. Hours and hours, until your hands were blistered even through the gloves. I called in sick to work on Monday so we could go back for more practice." "I remember," he said quietly. "The next year you made varsity. Robert took all the credit, telling everyone at Thanksgiving how he taught you to swing." The memory still stung. But I never corrected him, never said a word, because it wasn't about me getting credit. It was about you feeling proud of yourself. Andrew was silent, his eyes now fixed on the table. "When you had that panic attack before your SATs, who stayed up all night with you, talking you through breathing exercises, assuring you that your worth wasn't tied to a test score?" I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion rising in my throat. When Jessica broke up with you in college and you drove home at midnight, who sat with you on the couch until dawn, letting you cry and rage and finally sleep? When you were terrified about your bar exam, who quizzed you on flashcards for weeks? I leaned forward, forcing him to meet my eyes. Robert is a good man. He loves you, and he gave you things I couldn't. I've never begrudged you that relationship. But to say he was the father you never had. Andrew, I was there. Every day, every crisis, every triumph, I was there. Something shifted in his expression, recognition perhaps, or the beginning of understanding, but it wasn't enough, not after what had happened. I need some time, I said, standing up. What you said at the wedding, it didn't just hurt me, it erased me. It erased 28 years of my life that I devoted to being your father. I can't just shake that off over coffee. Dad, please. He reached for my arm. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I gently removed his hand, but you said it. And worse, you've clearly felt it for some time. That's what I need to process. I pulled out my wallet and placed enough money on the table to cover both our drinks. I'm not cutting you off. I'm not disappearing, but my seat at your wedding table is going to stay empty for a while, at least until I figure out where I actually fit in your life. Walking away from that cafe was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every step felt like moving through quicksand, my body physically resisting the separation from my son. But sometimes self-preservation has to take precedence, even over the love you have for your child. The weeks that followed were a strange limbo of grief and reflection. I went through the motions of my daily life, work at the insurance office where I'd been for the past 15 years, occasional dinners with the few friends I'd managed to maintain after years of putting parenting above socializing, weekly calls with my sister in Arizona. But inside, I was processing decades of memories, trying to understand how the story of our life together had been so completely rewritten in Andrew's mind. He called several times, left voicemails that started confident but grew increasingly uncertain as I didn't respond, sent text messages ranging from casual check-ins to lengthy apologies. I read them all, listened to each message, but I wasn't ready to respond. Not until I had figured out what I needed from him, what kind of relationship was possible going forward. It was during this period of silence that something unexpected happened. I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been set aside during the all-consuming years of single parenthood. I joined a local hiking group, something I'd loved in my youth, but had abandoned when weekend excursions became impossible with a young child. I reconnected with old friends from college, people I'd lost touch with when playdates and school functions took priority. I even started playing guitar again, something I'd once been passionate about. One evening, about 2 months after the wedding incident, I was sitting on my small balcony, strumming the refurbished guitar I'd found at a pawn shop, when my phone rang. It wasn't Andrew this time, but a number I didn't recognize. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Michael? It's Jessica, Andrew's wife." I was so surprised I nearly dropped the phone. Jessica and I had barely spoken beyond polite pleasantries at the few pre-wedding events I'd attended. She traveled in Andrew and Robert's world, not mine. "Jessica, this is unexpected." "I know, and I'm sorry to intrude." Her voice was hesitant but determined. "I was wondering if we could meet. There are some things I think you should know." Curiosity overcame my reluctance. We arranged to meet the following day at a bookstore cafe near her office during her lunch break. I spent a restless night wondering what Andrew's wife could possibly want to discuss with me. The bookstore cafe was quiet and dimly lit, a sanctuary of calm in the bustling downtown area where Jessica worked. She was already there when I arrived, dressed in an elegant business suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked younger somehow, more vulnerable than she had at the wedding. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I sat down across from her. "I have to admit I'm curious about what this is regarding," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. Jessica took a deep breath. "It's about Andrew. He's not doing well, Michael." A surge of parental concern immediately overrode any lingering hurt. "Is he sick? What's happened?" "Not physically ill," she clarified quickly. "But emotionally he's struggling. Ever since the wedding, since what happened with you. He's not sleeping, barely eating. He's distracted at work. I've never seen him like this." I sat back, absorbing this information. "I'm sorry to hear that. But I'm not sure what you expect me to do. He made his feelings quite clear." Jessica shook her head firmly. "That's just it. What he said at the wedding, it wasn't what he really feels. It was—" She paused, seemingly searching for the right words. "It was performance." "Performance," I repeated, confused. "Andrew has spent his entire adult life trying to fit into the world Robert introduced him to," Jessica explained. "My world, a world of privilege and connections and unspoken rules. And part of that performance has been distancing himself from his humble beginnings, as my father would say." The words stung, but there was truth in them I couldn't deny. "The thing is," she continued, "the man I fell in love with, the real Andrew beneath all that careful social climbing, is the man you raised, the one who stops to help strangers change flat tires, who remembers every staff member's name at our apartment building, who cries at dog rescue commercials." She smiled faintly at the last one. "He gets that from his mother," I said automatically, though I knew it wasn't true. His mother had never been the sentimental type. Jessica shook her head. "Robert told me about the time you found that injured hawk and spent 3 days nursing it in your apartment bathroom before taking it to a wildlife rescue. Andrew was 7, he said, and you made it a lesson about how every living thing deserves care and respect." I was startled she knew that story. It was a small moment from so long ago, something I'd almost forgotten myself. "Robert talks about you, you know," she continued. "Not to Andrew. He knows better. But he's mentioned things to me. He respects you, Michael. He knows what you sacrificed for Andrew." I found that hard to believe. Robert has spent years positioning himself as the superior father figure in Andrew's life. "No," Jessica said firmly. "Robert spent years giving Andrew things you couldn't. There's a difference. He never intended to replace you. Andrew did that reframing all on his own, partly because it made it easier to move between these different worlds." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, worn book. "Do you recognize this?" It was a copy of The Little Prince, its cover faded, its spine cracked from multiple readings. I reached for it with a trembling hand. "I used to read this to him every night," I said softly. "From the time he was 4 until he was almost 10. He knew parts of it by heart." Jessica nodded. "He still does. When he can't sleep, which is often lately, he recites passages from it, and then he usually ends up crying." She reached out hesitantly, touching my hand. "He keeps this on his nightstand, Michael. Not any of the expensive gifts from Robert or my parents. This book from you." I stared at the small volume, memories flooding back of Andrew curled against me in his small bed, listening with wide eyes as we traveled together to distant planets and learned about what it means to be tamed, to be responsible for someone you love. "There's more," Jessica said. "In his office, the only personal photo isn't from our wedding or any of the fancy trips Robert took him on. It's the 2 of you at his college graduation, just a simple selfie you took outside the ceremony." My throat tightened. I remembered that day clearly, the pride that had almost overwhelmed me watching him accept his diploma. We'd been too late to get good seats because I'd had a flat tire on the drive to the university, and we'd missed the professional photos afterwards because I had to move my car from a loading zone. The selfie had been an afterthought, a quick snap as we hurried to the reception. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. "Because Andrew is tormented by what he said at the wedding. He knows he hurt you deeply, and he's ashamed, but he's also terrified that he's permanently destroyed your relationship." She hesitated. "And because I think you deserve to know that despite what happened, you are deeply ingrained in who he is, the values you taught him, the love you showed him. Those things are at his core." I sat silently, processing everything she'd shared. Outside the bookstore windows, people rushed past, caught up in their own lives, their own dramas. Inside, my understanding of my relationship with my son was shifting, realigning. "There's one more thing," Jessica said quietly. "Something Andrew doesn't know I'm aware of." She pulled out her phone, scrolled through it briefly, then handed it to me. It was an email draft, apparently unsent, addressed to me. The date stamp showed it had been written at 3:18 a.m., just a week after our coffee meeting. "Dad, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if I'll have the courage to send it. But it's 3 a.m. and I can't sleep. Again, thinking about what I said to you, what I lost. The truth is, you were always my father, the only real father I've ever had. Uncle Robert gave me things, showed me places, opened doors, but you gave me a moral compass. You showed me what it means to work hard, to sacrifice for those you love, to face adversity with dignity. When I said those words at the wedding, it wasn't you I was rejecting. It was the part of myself I've been running from. The part that grew up in that small apartment, wearing second-hand clothes, watching you count pennies at the grocery store. I've spent so long trying to belong in Jessica's world that I convinced myself I needed to erase where I came from. But I was wrong. So wrong. Because everything good in me, everything true and solid and worthwhile, comes from you. From watching you choose integrity over convenience, love over resentment, perseverance over self-pity. I miss you, Dad. I miss your steady presence, your quiet wisdom, your unwavering belief in me. I'm sorry isn't enough for what I've done, but it's all I have to offer right now. That, and the promise that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of being your son again." Andrew, I handed the phone back to Jessica, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "He writes these almost every night," she said softly. "Drafts them, revises them, but never sends them. His pride, his shame, his fear, they're all getting in the way, but I thought you should know what's in his heart." The cafe seemed too small suddenly, the air too thick. I needed space to process, to think. "Thank you for showing me this," I managed finally, "for coming to see me." Jessica studied me, her eyes kind but searching. "What will you do now?" It was the question I'd been asking myself for months. What did I want? What could I accept? Where did we go from here? "I don't know yet," I answered honestly, "but I have more to think about now." As we parted ways outside the bookstore, Jessica surprised me with a quick, impulsive hug. "He's a good man, your son," she whispered. "Flawed and sometimes foolish, but good at his core. That's your legacy, Michael, no matter what happens next." I walked back to my car slowly, the copy of The Little Prince tucked carefully in my jacket pocket. Jessica had insisted I take it, saying Andrew had the passages he needed most memorized anyway. The small book felt heavy with meaning, with history, with possibility. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I needed time alone, space to think without the distraction of insurance claims and office politics. I drove to Hillside Park, a place Andrew and I used to go when he was small. We'd spend Saturday mornings here throwing a frisbee, feeding the ducks, eating sandwiches I'd packed in our worn cooler. I found a bench overlooking the small lake and sat down, feeling the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future pressing in from all sides. The park was quiet on a weekday morning, just a few mothers with strollers and elderly couples taking gentle walks along the paved paths. Jessica's revelations had thrown me off balance. The email draft, the book by his bedside, the photo in his office. These were not the actions of someone who truly believed I had never been a father to him. But the hurt of his public declaration remained, a wound still raw and painful. As I sat there, watching the gentle ripples on the lake's surface, I found myself wondering about the nature of fatherhood itself. What made a man a father? Was it biology, presence, sacrifice, the ability to provide material comforts and opportunities? Or was it something more intangible, the shaping of character, the transmission of values, the quiet steadfastness that provides a foundation for a child's life? I thought about my own father, a taciturn man who had worked in the same factory for 40 years. He had never been demonstrative, rarely offered praise, but his reliability had been absolute. I had always known where I stood with him, always known he would be there, solid as stone, when I needed him. Was that the model of fatherhood I had followed? And if so, how had Andrew and I ended up in this painful estrangement? A young father and son walked past my bench, the little boy, perhaps 4 or 5, chattering excitedly about a duck he'd spotted. The father listened with exaggerated interest, responding with questions that kept the child's enthusiasm bubbling. I smiled despite myself, remembering similar conversations with Andrew at that age, his curiosity boundless, his trust in my knowledge and wisdom absolute. When had that changed? When had Robert's glamorous lifestyle, his easy charm and financial generosity begun to overshadow the steady foundation I had worked so hard to provide? The answer came to me with sudden clarity. It wasn't about when Robert had entered the picture. He had always been there, a peripheral figure in Andrew's early childhood who became more central after the divorce. The real shift had come when Andrew began to feel ashamed of our modest life, when he started comparing what I could provide with what his peers had. I remembered a particular parents' night at his expensive private school, the one Robert had helped him get into. Andrew had been 14, just starting to become acutely aware of social status. I had arrived straight from work, still in my rumpled shirt and tie from the insurance office, not the custom suits the other fathers wore. I had noticed Andrew's discomfort as he introduced me to his friend's parents. The way he had downplayed my job rushed through the interactions. That night, driving home in our used Honda with the broken air conditioning, he had asked me for the first time why we couldn't live in a bigger house, why I couldn't get a better job, why we didn't take vacations to Europe like his friend Tyler's family. I had explained as best I could about educational opportunities, about career paths, about the financial realities of single parenthood. But looking back now, I could see that was the beginning, the moment when he started to see me not just as dad, but as a dad who couldn't provide what other fathers could. And wasn't that precisely what Robert had capitalized on? Not maliciously perhaps, but effectively nonetheless. He had stepped in to fill those material gaps, to offer Andrew entree into a world I couldn't access. And gradually, Andrew had begun to associate true fatherhood with those material provisions, rather than the emotional foundation I had given him. The realization didn't erase the hurt of his words at the wedding, but it helped me understand them better. He hadn't rejected me as his father. He had rejected the limitations that came with my fatherhood, limitations that had made him feel other in the privileged world he was trying so desperately to belong to. I pulled out my phone, staring at it for a long moment before dialing Andrew's number. It rang once, twice, then his voice, breathless, as if he'd rushed to answer. "Dad?" "Hello, Andrew," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I think it's time we talked. Really talked." "Yes," he agreed immediately. "Please, when? Where?" "Tonight. My place." Our old apartment, where he had grown up, seemed the right setting for the conversation we needed to have. 7 o'clock. "I'll be there," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Dad, Save it for tonight," I interrupted gently. "Some conversations shouldn't happen over the phone." After we hung up, I spent the rest of the day preparing, not just the apartment, Though I did clean and buy groceries to make his favorite pasta dish, more importantly, I prepared myself. I wrote down what I needed to say, what I needed to ask, what I was willing to forgive, and what would require time to heal. At precisely 7, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, I was startled by Andrew's appearance. Jessica hadn't exaggerated about his condition. He had lost weight, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, testifying to the sleepless nights she had mentioned. "Dad," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. I stepped aside to let him in, noticing how his eyes moved around the familiar space, the worn couch where we had watched countless movies together, the dining table marked with rings from hot cups and scratches from homework projects, the wall of photos documenting his growth from toddler to man. "It smells like your marinara sauce," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "I thought we could use some comfort food for this conversation," I replied, gesturing for him to sit. "It's almost ready." We moved through the familiar routine of setting the table, pouring drinks, serving food. The domesticity of it eased some of the tension between us, creating a space where we might find our way back to each other. Once we were seated with full plates in front of us, I took a deep breath. "Before we begin, I want you to know something. I met with Jessica." Surprise flickered across his face. "You did? When?" "Yesterday. She came to see me, to talk about you." I paused, watching him carefully. "She showed me the email draft you wrote but never sent." Andrew closed his eyes briefly, his face flushing with embarrassment. "She shouldn't have done that. Those words, they weren't ready." "When would they have been ready, Andrew? It's been months." He looked down at his untouched food. "I don't know. I kept rewriting it, trying to find the perfect words to explain, to apologize. But nothing seemed adequate after what I did. What you said at the wedding," I said quietly. "It hurt more than anything I've ever experienced. To be publicly erased from your life after everything we've been through together." "I know," he whispered, meeting my eyes at last. "And there's no excuse." "Not really, but if you'll let me, I want to try to explain what was happening in my head." I nodded, giving him the space to continue. That day, everything was so overwhelming. Jessica's family, their friends, all these successful, wealthy people, I've spent years trying to convince them I belong in their world. And then there was Robert, who they all respect, who moves through their circles with such ease. He pushed his pasta around his plate. When he made that toast, talking about how he'd guided me, helped shape me into the man I've become, I wanted to strengthen that connection in front of everyone. I wanted them to see me as part of that world, not the kid from the small apartment with second-hand clothes. "So, you rejected me to elevate yourself socially," I said flatly. Andrew flinched. "When you put it that way, it sounds awful. But yes, in that moment, that's exactly what I did, and I've hated myself for it every day since." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his admission hanging between us. "I need you to understand something, Andrew," I finally said. "I have never begrudged you the advantages Robert could provide. I was grateful he could offer you opportunities I couldn't. What hurt was feeling like none of what I did mattered in comparison, that material advantages somehow outweighed years of day-to-day love and care." "They don't," Andrew said quickly. "Dad, they never did. That's what I've been trying to tell myself in those email drafts. Everything substantial in me, everything real, it all came from you. Robert taught me to play golf and introduced me to the right people. You taught me how to be a man I can respect when I look in the mirror." The admission hung in the air between us, the first real acknowledgement of the foundation I had provided, the values I had instilled. "Jessica said something interesting," I told him. "She said the man she fell in love with is the man I raised, not the social climber who's been trying so hard to fit into her world." Andrew nodded slowly. She's right. And it's exhausting, Dad. Constantly performing, constantly worrying about saying or doing the wrong thing. With you, I could just be myself. Until you couldn't, I pointed out gently. Until being yourself, being my son, became something you were ashamed of. He didn't deny it, which I appreciated. We were beyond platitudes now, moving into the difficult territory of hard truths. I won't lie and say it doesn't still hurt, I continued. But I understand better now why it happened. The question is, where do we go from here? Andrew looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. I don't know. I just know I can't lose you, Dad. These past months without you, it's been like missing a limb, a vital part of myself gone. I reached across the table and took his hand, something I hadn't done since he was a small boy. You haven't lost me, Andrew. You hurt me deeply, yes, but you're my son. That hasn't changed. It will never change. The relief that washed over his face was palpable. So we can fix this, start over somehow. I squeezed his hand, then released it. Not start over. I don't think we can or should erase what happened, but we can move forward, rebuild what was damaged. It will take time, honesty, and a commitment from both of us to understand each other better. For the first time that evening, Andrew took a bite of his pasta, some color returning to his face. I'd like that. Very much. Oh, so would I said simply. We finished our meal talking about simpler things, his work, my recent interest in hiking, Jessica's new project at her architecture firm. It wasn't a complete resolution, not yet. There were still conversations to be had, boundaries to be established, trust to be rebuilt, but it was a beginning, a step back toward each other after months of painful separation. As he was preparing to leave, Andrew paused by the wall of photos, his gaze lingering on one from his 10th birthday. The two of us, faces smeared with chocolate cake, laughing into the camera. I remember that day, he said softly. You had worked a double shift the night before, but still got up early to decorate the apartment with streamers before I woke up. I nodded, the memory vivid. You were so excited about that chocolate cake, said it was the best birthday ever. It was, he confirmed, turning to face me, because you were there, Dad. You were always there, even when I was too blind to see it, too foolish to appreciate it. He stepped forward then, pulling me into a tight hug, his face pressed against my shoulder, just as it had been when he was a boy, seeking comfort after a nightmare. I love you, Dad, he whispered. And I'm so sorry. I love you too, son, I replied, holding him close, feeling something broken begin to mend between us. Always have, always will. My seat at his wedding table had remained empty that day, a visual reminder of the wound inflicted by careless words. But standing there in our modest apartment, arms wrapped around my only child, I knew with certainty that my place in his life, in his heart, had never truly been vacant. It had merely been overlooked, temporarily forgotten in the glare of a world that values appearance over substance, wealth over worth. And that was something we could rebuild together, one honest conversation at a time.